When I bought the house at the edge of Pine Hollow Creek, I thought I was getting the best deal in the entire neighborhood. The property backed right up to a bubbling little stream, shaded by old oaks and maples, with deer that wandered through in the early mornings. Peaceful, private, mine. That was before Lorraine Whitmore, the HOA president, decided my creek was a liability issue. "You can't just let water run wild, Leonard," she said, arms crossed over her salmon-colored cardigan, standing at the edge of my lawn like she owned the entire zip code. "It's an eyesore and a hazard." The HOA board voted, "We're addressing it." "Addressing it how?" I asked. She handed me a bright orange flyer printed on HOA letterhead. "We're filling it in with concrete next week. Drainage will be rerouted. It's for the safety of the community." I laughed, thinking it had to be a joke. "You're gonna fill in a natural creek on my land. It's common water, Leonard. Read your bylaws." I did. I read every word of that thick, smug packet they handed me when I moved in 3 years ago. Nothing in there said they could lay a finger on private property without the owner's consent. And I sure as hell never gave mine, so I told her no, flat out. I even put up a sign. "Private property, do not alter." She didn't care. The next Monday I came home from work to find a cement truck in my backyard. I ran down the slope yelling, "Get off my land." "Who approved this?" One of the workers pointed toward the street. Lorraine stood there with a clipboard, giving a thumbs up like she was directing a movie. I nearly lost it. "This is illegal. You're trespassing." She didn't even flinch. "We have a permit. The HOA authorized the improvement." "You should be thanking us. It'll raise property values." I called the county. "No permit." I called the cops. They said it was a civil matter unless I had proof of property damage. The concrete had already started to set. I stood there, helpless, as they choked the life out of my creek. Birds scattered. Frogs vanished. The bubbling water was gone, sealed beneath a gray tomb of HOA arrogance. But karma, like water, has a way of finding its way back. That winter, the rain came hard, 3 storms in 2 weeks. The creek, now blocked, had nowhere to go. By February, Lorraine's backyard was a swamp, then her neighbors, then the one after that, and my house sat high and dry. I spent the next few weeks collecting photos. Lorraine's backyard submerged past the stepping stones, the retaining wall behind her garage beginning to lean, and the pungent green waterline creeping up her neighbor's fences like a slow, rotting tide. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. But one afternoon, as I was tightening the hinges on my shed door, I heard the unmistakable crunch of heels on gravel behind me. "Leonard," Lorraine called out, her voice less confident now, thinner. "I was hoping we could talk." I turned slowly, keeping my expression unreadable. "Sure." "Something on your mind?" She hesitated at the edge of my property. Her shoes were stained with mud, and the hem of her skirt had a faint brown watermark. "We're seeing some unexpected drainage issues," she said, as though reading from a script. "Some of the residents are concerned about water pooling." "You don't say." She gave a tight laugh that didn't match her eyes. "We think the creek might have been directing excess runoff, and with the new changes, well, there may have been some miscalculations." "Would you be willing to discuss a restoration plan?" I leaned against the shed. "You mean undoing the thing you didn't have permission to do in the first place?" Her smile flickered. "There's no need to be antagonistic. We all want what's best for the neighborhood." I kept my voice calm. "Then why didn't you check the watershed maps before you poured 6 yards of concrete over a natural runoff channel?" She shifted her weight, glancing back toward the street. "We didn't realize the impact would be so extensive." I gestured toward the rising flood line visible through the trees. "You mean the fact that water obeys gravity?" She cleared her throat. "The board is willing to fund a partial excavation. We'd remove a section to allow limited flow." "Not good enough," I said. "You buried a protected waterway. That's not just a miscalculation. That's a violation of county code." She blinked. "Protected?" I nodded. "I did some digging. Turns out Pine Hollow Creek is part of a seasonal tributary system. It's registered, which means altering it without a certified environmental impact assessment is a Class C misdemeanor under county law. And if property damage results, it escalates. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. I walked over to the workbench and picked up a folder. I already submitted a complaint to the county environmental office, with photos. And I copied the Department of Natural Resources. Her gaze dropped to the folder. You're serious. Dead serious. She opened her mouth again, but this time her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and whatever she saw drained the last bit of color from her face. I need to go, she muttered, turning on her heel. That night, an inspector from the county showed up with a flashlight and clipboard. He knocked on my door, introduced himself, and asked if I'd be willing to walk him through what happened. I led him out back with a flashlight of my own. The concrete was still there, but moss had already started to creep across the surface. The water had begun seeping around the edges, carving little rivulets in defiance. He crouched near the edge of one of the makeshift channels. You said this was poured in January, correct? He pulled out a small level and placed it on the slab. You're not going to believe this, but the entire thing is sloped backward. No wonder it flooded upstream. I raised an eyebrow. So they didn't just break the law, they were bad at it. He stood. I'll need to file a report. This isn't going away quietly. The next morning, a letter arrived from the HOA, not certified, not formal, just a single sheet of paper with a printed header and a terse paragraph. The HOA Board of Pine Hollow Creek formally requests a cooperative discussion with regard to resolving recent drainage complications. You are invited to attend a closed session meeting this Thursday. I didn't respond. Instead, I contacted a local environmental attorney named Dana Caldwell, whose name had come up more than once in municipal disputes. She had a reputation for being relentless, especially when it involved misuse of public waterways. After reviewing the case, Dana grinned and said, "Oh, this is going to be fun." We filed a formal complaint with the county's Environmental Enforcement Division. Dana also sent a cease and desist to the HOA's board, naming not just the association but each voting member who approved the project. Individually. A week later, a second inspector came, this one from the DNR. He took soil samples, elevation readings, and drone footage. When he left, he gave me a nod that said everything. 2 days after that, Lorraine's driveway was blocked off by an orange barricade. A crew in reflective vests began tearing up the sidewalk in front of her house. Turns out, the county had traced the altered flow patterns and found that the blockage had caused a backflow into a storm drain system connected to municipal lines. That meant public infrastructure had been affected. Which meant one thing: the city attorney got involved. On a Thursday afternoon, while I was trimming the hedges, a black SUV with city plates pulled up across the street. Out stepped a man in a gray suit and mirrored sunglasses, followed by 2 uniformed officers. They didn't knock on my door. They knocked on Lorraine's. I stayed out of sight, but I could hear her voice tight, desperate as she tried to explain that it wasn't her decision alone, that the board had voted, that she was acting in the interest of the community. Didn't matter. The city had a report, a timeline, and a stack of photos showing her giving a thumbs up to the cement truck. That night, the neighborhood group chat exploded. Screenshots popped up showing board emails bragging about taking control of the creek and setting an example for other residents who didn't comply with HOA landscaping expectations. One resident, a retired teacher named Martha Ridgway, posted a photo of her own backyard flooded halfway to the porch. She demanded a public accounting. The next day, someone nailed a cardboard sign to the HOA kiosk. Accountability flows downstream. At the emergency board meeting held in the community clubhouse, only half the members showed up. The rest had resigned. Lorraine was there, though. She looked 10 years older, her voice hoarse as she tried to maintain control of the room. But the residents weren't having it. A man in the back, Greg, the electrician who lived 2 doors down from me, stood up and said, "You poured concrete over a watershed. You lied about a permit. You flooded our homes. You're finished." No one clapped, no one needed to. That evening I got a call from Dana. The county's pressing charges for environmental damage. They're going to fine the HOA heavily. And the board, 3 members are being named in a civil suit. Possibly criminal negligence, depending on how deep this goes. I looked out my window at the creek, or what was left of it. The water had started to trickle through cracks in the concrete, reclaiming its path inch by inch. Good, I said. Let them feel what it's like to drown in their own mess. It was nearly dusk when I got the call from Officer Delgado, the same officer who'd brushed me off weeks back when I first reported the unauthorized concrete pour. Now his voice was careful, the kind of careful you use when you're reading from a prepared list you didn't write yourself. Mr. Drayton, I'm following up regarding the ongoing investigation into the HOA's actions near your property. We'd like to schedule a walkthrough with a county prosecutor and a hydrology consultant. Are you available tomorrow morning? I was. And I made sure every inch of my property line was clearly marked with orange tape and freshly printed survey maps by the time they arrived. They showed up in 2 vehicles. Delgado stepped out first, this time carrying an evidence bag and a recording device. Behind him came a woman in a navy trench coat who introduced herself as Assistant District Attorney Madison Crowley. A third man, wearing a field vest with a laminated ID badge tagged Watershed Compliance Division, trailed behind them, already snapping pictures with a long lens camera. Crowley wasted no time. We've confirmed that Pine Hollow Creek is listed under the county's intermittent stream protections. Any structural modification required a permit, a hydrological survey, and formal notice to adjacent property owners. None of that was done. I pointed toward the concrete slab, now fractured in several places from the relentless pressure of diverted water. You're a little late. The hydrologist knelt by one of the breaks. In a way, it's good you didn't try to remove this yourself. Any tampering could have been used against you, but as it stands, he ran his fingers along the crack. This was textbook illegal obstruction. And it's failing. Crowley took notes. We're building a case for environmental negligence and reckless endangerment. One of the homes near the south end of the development registered structural shifting due to soil saturation. A foundation engineer has tied it directly to the altered water flow. I crossed my arms. So they're not just getting fined. She didn't look up. If the timeline holds, we'll be pursuing criminal charges against the board president and at least 2 officers for violating county building and environmental codes. Possibly more, depending on the HOA's financial disclosures. That caught my attention. What do finances have to do with this? Delgado answered. We got a tip that the board used association dues to contract the concrete job without a vote, no third-party bidding. The contractor they used, turns out his brother-in-law is on the board, Crowley added. That's procurement fraud. If proven, it opens the door to restitution claims and civil suits from every homeowner impacted by flooding. I said nothing, but I could already see it unraveling. Later that evening, I was in my garage reviewing the drone footage the hydrologist had emailed me when Greg from 2 doors down knocked on the side entrance. He looked worn out, but there was fire in his eyes. You see the HOA's emergency notice? I shook my head. He handed me a printed copy. Unlike their usual glossy announcements, this one was plain black text on a white sheet, stapled sloppily to mailboxes earlier that afternoon. It read like a panic attack in memo form. The board was temporarily suspending all discretionary spending, citing legal complications. They were also postponing the spring beautification project and reevaluating community improvement plans. Greg folded his arms. Word is they're lawyering up. Lorraine hasn't been seen in 2 days. Her husband said she's resting out of town. I nodded once. They think disappearing makes the mess go away. I think they're scared. He looked toward the creek where the water had begun forcing a new channel along the far edge of the concrete. You were right from the start. We should have backed you up earlier. You still can, I said. There's going to be a hearing. Public comments open. People need to show up and speak. Greg patted the folder under his arm. Already writing mine. The county scheduled the hearing in the main council building downtown. The room was packed. Homeowners from every corner of Pine Hollow Creek showed up, some with folders, others with photos, and one woman, Martha Ridgway, brought a half-destroyed garden gnome as evidence of flood damage. The board members sat in a row near the front, flanked by their attorney. Lorraine had returned, though she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was tied back in a practical bun, her usual pastel ensembles replaced by a charcoal blazer 2 sizes too large. When the county commissioner opened the floor for public comment, no one hesitated. Martha went first. My backyard used to be a place my grandkids played. Now it smells like a sewer and the fence is rotting. I never voted for a creek burial. No one asked me. A man named Tyson, who lived on the opposite end of the development, held up a stack of emails. These are board communications obtained through a subpoena. They show Lorraine and the treasurer discussing how to fast-track the pour before anyone could object. They called it a test run for future authority. This isn't mismanagement. It's a power grab. Each speaker added a thread to the unraveling narrative: secret meetings, misuse of funds, ignored warnings from a former HOA groundskeeper who had been quietly dismissed 2 weeks before the pour. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. They walked onto my property without permission, altered a protected waterway, and caused damage to over a dozen homes. Then they lied about it. If I did that as a private citizen, I'd be in jail. Crowley stood next. The county is preparing formal charges, including falsification of municipal forms and environmental tampering. This board not only acted without authority, they did so in direct violation of county and state law. The room buzzed, but the board's attorney raised his hand. My clients maintain that they operated under the belief that the creek was part of shared drainage infrastructure. Any misinterpretation was unintentional. Crowley didn't flinch. We have emails and vote records showing otherwise. The commissioner leaned forward. At this time, we are initiating a full audit of the HOA's activities over the past 5 years. Effective immediately, all executive privileges of the current board are suspended pending investigation. The next day, a court order was taped to the HOA's clubhouse door. It named Lorraine Whitmore, Gerald Nash, the treasurer, and Erica Breen, the vice president, as co-defendants in a civil suit filed by the county and a class action by residents. The charges ranged from unlawful property modification to fiduciary misconduct. The contractor, whose company name had been scratched off the original invoice, was also under investigation for unlicensed operation. Within a week, the remaining board members resigned. A temporary oversight committee was appointed by the county. Greg, Martha, and a surprisingly sharp former postal worker named Edwin were among the new appointees. Their first act: hiring an environmental restoration firm to assess what could be salvaged. The concrete had to go. But it couldn't just be ripped out. Removal had to be staged, measured, and approved by hydrology teams. The restoration firm built a berm system to redirect the water flow safely during deconstruction. It took 3 weeks, but the first slab came out under cloudy skies and slow drizzle. When the final chunk was lifted by crane, revealing the dark, wet soil beneath, I stood in silence with half the neighborhood watching. Nobody clapped. It wasn't a victory lap. It was a correction. Later, as the water trickled back into its old path, a quiet cheer rose from the younger kids watching from their yards. They pointed at frogs hopping along the banks, at minnows darting between rocks. I turned to Greg. "Think we'll get it back the way it was," he shrugged. "Nature's stubborn." "So are we." Weeks passed. The swamp in Lorraine's yard slowly receded. Her home was listed for sale quietly with no open house. The listing mentioned unique water features. No one was fooled. The new board abolished discretionary projects pending full community votes. They installed a community website that posted every receipt, vote, and decision in real time. It wasn't perfect, but it was transparent, and the creek, it ran again steadier, louder even, as if reclaiming its voice. I spent one last evening on my back deck, watching the fireflies flicker over the water, before finally packing up the last of my paperwork on the case. I kept one folder labeled HOA Incident in my filing cabinet, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. Power doesn't flow from a title or a podium. It flows from people who refuse to be silenced, and sometimes it flows right through concrete. The restoration crew moved fast once the last of the concrete was removed. They worked in silence most days, save for the hum of pumps and the scrape of shovels. I stayed out of their way, only watching from a distance as they widened the channel and reinforced the banks with natural stone and native plants. The creek's return wasn't just a repair, it was a rebirth, and the entire neighborhood felt it. But the fallout from the HOA's actions was far from over. On a rainy Tuesday morning, a plain white sedan with government plates pulled into the newly repaved cul-de-sac. A woman in a dark blue suit stepped out, holding a leather case and a badge that read, State Office of Government Ethics Special Investigations Unit. Her name was Leonard Chavez. She didn't ask questions, she stated facts. I'm here to review the financial records from the Pine Hollow Creek Homeowners Association, she said to Greg, who had taken over as interim board chair. There are inconsistencies in the disbursement ledgers submitted to the county during the environmental hearing. The Attorney General's office flagged 3 payments to a shell LLC registered to a vacant lot in Wichita. Greg frowned. That wasn't on any of the reports we received. Chavez nodded once. That's why I'm here. She set up in the community clubhouse, spreading files across a folding table under flickering fluorescent lights. Every half hour or so, she emerged to ask for a new set of documents, vendor lists, maintenance invoices, bank statements from the HOA's escrow account. Greg provided what he could. The rest, she pulled directly from subpoenas that had just cleared. By Friday, Chavez had what she needed. She walked out of the clubhouse with a folder clutched tight under her arm and a look that told me this was bigger than anyone had guessed. The next week, residents received letters from the state attorney general's office. They were formal notices informing us that a criminal investigation had been opened into financial misconduct, conspiracy to defraud, and most disturbingly, potential bribery involving a zoning officer who had allegedly assured the HOA board that the creek was exempt from oversight. That zoning officer was arrested the following Monday. His name was Leo Partridge, and he had quietly resigned from the county's Planning and Development Division 2 months earlier. Turns out, Lorraine had paid him under the table through the shell LLC Chavez had uncovered. In exchange, he provided a falsified report stating that the creek was non-essential runoff. That report had been used to justify the concrete pour. The charges against Partridge included document fabrication, bribery of a public official, and obstruction of environmental regulations. He was escorted out of his apartment in cuffs by state troopers. Lorraine wasn't far behind. The morning she was arrested, I was standing at my mailbox, flipping through a stack of flyers when 2 unmarked SUVs rolled to a stop in front of her house. 4 plainclothes officers stepped out, and within minutes, she was led down her porch steps with her hands behind her back. Surrounded by flashing cameras and stunned neighbors, her face was blank. Not defiant, not ashamed, just empty. The charges leveled against her were staggering. Conspiracy to commit fraud, misappropriation of community funds, unlawful property modification, and bribery of a government official. The state had built a solid case, and her lawyer didn't even bother asking for bail. Erica Breen and Gerald Nash, the other 2 board members involved, were indicted shortly after. Both had signed the checks that funneled money into the shell LLC. Gerald tried to claim ignorance, but Chavez had a copy of an email he sent to Lorraine titled, Wichita Account Use for Project. Their trial was scheduled for early spring. Meanwhile, the new board worked to rebuild trust in the neighborhood. They held open meetings twice a week, invited residents to vote on every initiative, and brought in a third-party auditor to comb through the last 5 years of HOA activity. The audit uncovered even more misuse of funds, landscaping contracts awarded to friends, inflated maintenance costs, and a line item labeled Community Enhancement Consulting that turned out to be nothing more than a monthly payment to a former board member's cousin for doing absolutely nothing. Residents were furious, but they were also motivated. By mid-March, a civil suit had been filed by 34 homeowners, naming the HOA board, the contractor, and the zoning officer as co-defendants. Damages sought totaled over $2 million. The suit alleged property damage, loss of property value, emotional distress, and breach of fiduciary duty. I wasn't surprised when the contractor settled almost immediately. His company was dissolved within a week, the rest dragged on, but justice, slow as it was, kept coming. At Lorraine's trial, the prosecution laid everything out in meticulous detail. They had emails, bank records, testimony from the restoration crew, and even a recorded phone call between Lorraine and Partridge where she said, "We'll handle the creek before anyone realizes what's under it." The jury took less than a day to convict her. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison with an additional 3 years of probation. Gerald received 3 years. Erica got 2.5, none of them appealed. The civil suit ended in a multimillion-dollar judgment against the HOA's insurance provider, which was forced to cover the damages and legal fees. Homeowners received settlement checks based on the extent of the flooding and structural harm. I used mine to upgrade the deck, add motion lighting, and install a small walking path down to the water's edge, lined with river stones and ferns. But the real victory wasn't in the check. It was in the sound of the creek flowing freely again. One morning, I spotted a family of ducks paddling along the bend behind my house, the mother leading her ducklings through the reeds like it had always been theirs. In a way, it had. We were just finally getting out of their way. The new board passed a resolution no structural changes to any natural features could be made without a unanimous vote from the community and approval from 2 environmental consultants. It was a safeguard born from hard lessons, and nobody questioned it. Eleanor Chavez stopped by one final time before closing the file. "You know," she said, looking out over the water, "I've investigated a lot of HOA fraud cases, but this was special. They didn't just steal money, they tried to bury a living thing." I nodded. "And it came back louder." She smiled faintly, then handed me a copy of the final report for my records. "You helped a lot more than you realize, not just here. This case triggered a state review of over 80 HOA boards. Some of them are already being dissolved." When she left, I walked down the path and sat by the creek, watching the current catch the sunlight in flashes. I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition. I just needed the water to keep moving, and it did.